The galactic market was known across the stars as a place of peace, where beings from every corner of the universe came to trade, talk, and explore each other's worlds. It was floating in orbit around a quiet blue star, far from any wars or political tension. People came here to forget their troubles and experience something new. That day, the market was especially busy. Lights blinked from hundreds of floating stalls, strange music echoed from alien instruments, and the scent of unfamiliar spices danced through the air. Among the crowd moved a human couple. Lena, a curious woman with bright eyes and a soft smile, and her husband, Mark, a quiet engineer who observed more than he spoke. They weren't diplomats, soldiers, or explorers. They were ordinary travelers, simply enjoying the experience of seeing a galaxy that Earth had only recently joined. Lena wandered ahead with excitement, stopping at each new booth, asking questions with genuine interest, even learning how to say thank you in 3 different alien languages. Mark stayed close behind, carrying a small bag of tools and trinkets, occasionally pausing to study some old alien tech that caught his eye. For hours, they moved through the crowds without any trouble, until it happened. Lena had just stepped back from a stall selling glowing crystals when she accidentally bumped into someone tall, heavy, and covered in metallic armor. The being was a Threx, a warrior species known for their pride and short tempers. This one stood nearly 8 feet tall, with dark red skin beneath his armor and piercing black eyes. His name was Zarkul, and he didn't like being touched, especially not by a human. He turned sharply, looked down at Lena, and without saying a word, shoved her aside with one heavy arm. She stumbled back, tripped on the corner of the stall, and fell hard to the ground. The music stopped. Conversations faded. The crowd fell into sudden silence. Eyes turned. Stares froze. No one moved, not even Lena, who sat up slowly with wide eyes, more surprised than hurt. Her hand touched her elbow, just a little scraped. The alien who pushed her didn't look angry or guilty. He looked annoyed, like someone who had swatted a bug. To him, she wasn't worth his time. That's when Mark turned. He had been examining a small hovering device, just 2 stalls away when he heard the crowd go silent. His eyes quickly scanned the scene, found his wife on the ground, and then looked up at the towering figure who had pushed her. His face didn't show anger or fear. He simply walked toward Lena, knelt beside her, and helped her up with calm, steady hands. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Lena nodded, still shaken, but not hurt. A nearby vendor offered her a clean cloth, and a creature with 6 arms helped gather the items she had dropped. As Mark stood up, he looked at Zarkul, not with rage, but with quiet eyes full of thought. Zarkul stared back, expecting yelling, threats, or maybe even a foolish challenge. But nothing like that came. Mark simply nodded once, then turned back to his wife, brushing the dust off her coat. The crowd remained silent, watching closely. Humans were new to the galactic scene, and not many knew what to expect from them in moments like this. Zarkul chuckled under his breath and walked away, thinking the matter was over. But Mark's silence was not weakness. It was calculation. He didn't want to fight in front of so many different species. He didn't want to cause a scene or make things worse. But he had made a decision. Something had changed in his mind the moment he saw his wife on the ground. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. But deep inside, he made a quiet promise. This wouldn't be ignored. Not because he wanted revenge, but because respect mattered. And Zarkul had broken something important. Not just a rule, but a line that should never be crossed, especially in a place of peace. As they walked away from the market, Lena still a little shaken, Mark's thoughts were already forming a plan. Not one of violence or anger, but of understanding and consequence. He knew how to send a message, and he would send it in a way that Zarkul and everyone else would never forget. The galactic market had returned to its usual rhythm, but something in the air had changed. While music played and lights blinked again, Whispers moved faster than any ship. The story of a human woman being pushed by a Threx warrior had already begun spreading through the crowded halls and glowing pathways. Many beings were shocked, not only by the action itself, but by the human response, silent, calm, and strangely controlled. Some expected the humans to demand justice, others thought a fight would break out. But instead, the human man, Mark, had done nothing. At least not yet. And that silence was louder than any shouting could have been. While Lena rested in their rented quarters aboard the orbiting station, Mark sat quietly in the corner, his fingers tapping slowly on a small device in his lap. His eyes didn't blink much, focused on a simple screen that glowed with information. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. But he understood how systems worked. He knew how to read networks, how to follow public reactions, and how to track the flow of data from one place to another. And right now, the small recording of Zarkul pushing Lena was already being shared across communication feeds. Not with loud commentary, just the quiet, powerful image of a woman being pushed to the ground, and a man walking up to her in silence. The story was telling itself, and that's what made it stronger. Zarkul, on the other hand, was enjoying a meal in the Threx quarter of the market station. He believed the situation was over. In his mind, he had only responded to disrespect. A human had touched him without permission, and he had reacted the way his kind always did. He didn't regret it, and he didn't think about the humans again, until his communication device began to buzz. A fellow warrior sent him a message with a single line, "You're becoming popular." Zarkul frowned, opened the feed, and saw the image. The market's security recording had leaked, or more likely, had been shared by someone watching. The video was short but powerful. His action, done in a moment of irritation, now looked aggressive and shameful in the eyes of the galaxy. The comments were mixed, but most were not on his side. He read messages calling him a danger to peace, unfit for trade, and even a poor example of Threx honor. That last one made him pause. Honor meant everything to his people. Losing a fight was one thing. Losing honor was worse. Meanwhile, Mark had already made a quiet request to meet with Zarkul, not in public, not with cameras, and not with guards. Just a meeting between two individuals, face to face. The request was sent formally, through proper channels, as if it were a business discussion. This confused the Threx, but curiosity and pride led Zarkul to accept. He thought the human might come to complain or ask for an apology, maybe even try to make a deal to forget what happened. But Zarkul didn't know Mark. He didn't understand that humans could be patient and quiet, yet carry a message far heavier than fists. The next day, Mark entered the Threx section of the station alone. He wore no armor, no tools, and no expression of fear. The guards scanned him, checked his identity, and allowed him to enter. Zarkul waited in a private chamber filled with metallic symbols and large stone chairs. He stood tall, arms crossed, expecting a weak man or an emotional outburst. Instead, he saw someone calm, steady, and prepared. Mark nodded politely and sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but tense, like the air before a storm. Then Mark spoke, not with anger, but with clarity. He didn't demand anything. He didn't shout or accuse. He simply told Zarkul what had happened from his point of view. He explained how his wife had been excited to see the market, how she had never meant any harm, and how that single moment, one push, had changed everything. Mark described what it meant to humans when someone hurt a loved one, not through violence, but through disrespect. He didn't use threats. He used truth. He told Zarkul how the galaxy was watching now, not because of the push itself, but because of how the Threx responded afterward, with silence, with no apology, no understanding, and no effort to make peace. He showed Zarkul the data, trade partners reconsidering deals, peaceful species turning away, even Threx students being disinvited from neutral academies. All of it happening slowly, quietly, like a storm building on the horizon. Zarkol listened. At first he tried to defend himself, saying he had followed instinct, tradition, the ways of his people. But Mark countered calmly. Then maybe your tradition needs to grow, if it breaks what others are trying to build. That sentence struck deeper than any blade. Mark didn't demand punishment. He didn't ask for revenge. He wanted only one thing: understanding. He told Zarkol that humans didn't forget easily, but they forgave those who learned. He stood to leave, paused at the door, and said one final sentence. You didn't just strike a woman, you struck your own future. Then he left, leaving Zarkol alone in the silence he once believed was strength. Now, that silence felt heavier than ever. It was not filled with fear, but with thought. It was the quiet before something bigger, something that could not be stopped with power or pride. It was the beginning of a shift, not just for one warrior, but for the galaxy watching closely. The station continued its quiet spin through the void of space, but beneath its calm exterior, there was tension building like a hidden current beneath still waters. Conversations around the galactic market had shifted from curiosity to caution. The Threx warrior Zarkol, once feared and respected for his brute strength, had become a symbol of something much darker: pride without restraint, strength without wisdom. Meanwhile, the human couple remained strangely quiet. Lena stayed in their quarters, reading reports from Earth, watching the growing talk around the incident with a calm she had learned from her husband. Mark, on the other hand, wasn't staying quiet because he was afraid. He was waiting. He understood something that many species still didn't. Human nature isn't always loud, but it always remembers. Humans didn't just react. They watched, they waited, and when the time came, they acted with purpose. Mark was not a soldier, not a fighter, and not someone who enjoyed conflict. But he believed in consequences, and he believed in teaching, not with force, but with experience. So when he received a message from the station's neutral council asking if he'd be willing to participate in a cultural exchange program, he knew it was the right moment to act. The council had seen the growing tension and wanted to show that the galactic market was still a place of peace and cooperation. They had asked both Mark and Zarkol to represent their species, not in a debate, not in a fight, but in a shared challenge of minds and strength that would be observed by dozens of species. A peaceful contest meant to promote unity. It sounded simple, but Mark understood it would be anything but. The arena was set in one of the oldest sections of the station, a place designed for friendly games and demonstrations between species. The walls were high, lined with observers from every corner of the galaxy. Screens floated overhead, displaying the rules of the challenge. 5 rounds, each testing different values: logic, memory, endurance, adaptability, and finally, teamwork. The last round had to be completed together, no matter the past between the participants. It was a clever setup. Whoever designed it had clearly hoped that forcing the two to cooperate would break the tension and rebuild some respect. But what they didn't understand was that this was the real battlefield, not fists or weapons, but minds and principles. Zarkol entered the arena in full display, armor polished, stance proud. He believed this was his chance to reclaim his reputation. The Threx believed in proving themselves through physical dominance, and he expected the challenge to be another way to show superiority. But when Mark entered, wearing only simple clothes and a tool belt, he didn't look like a warrior. He looked like a man with a plan. And that made many in the crowd lean forward, sensing that something was different this time. The first round tested logic through a shifting maze of lights and sounds, where one had to find a pattern and escape before the paths reset. Zarkol rushed forward, breaking through barriers with sheer force, but Mark studied the colors, mapped the rhythm in his head, and calmly walked out of the maze faster. The second round tested memory, with a wall of alien symbols shown for only 10 seconds. Zarkol remembered some, but Mark had practiced this kind of thing since childhood. He didn't just remember the symbols. He grouped them into shapes, sounds, and emotions. Another quiet win. The third round tested endurance in artificial gravity, where both had to carry weighted orbs through a series of platforms. This time, Zarkul won easily. His strength was undeniable. But Mark didn't mind losing. He was learning. The fourth round tested adaptability in a room where the rules of physics kept changing. Gravity shifted, heat pulsed, light flickered. Zarkul struggled with each shift, getting frustrated, trying to power through. But Mark adjusted his pace, read the signs, and moved with the changes rather than fighting them. Another quiet victory. By the time they reached the final round, teamwork, Zarkul's face had changed. He was no longer annoyed. He was confused. This human, who had said nothing aggressive, had now beaten him in every round except raw strength. Yet he showed no pride, no mocking, just focus. The final test was a floating structure slowly sinking into a simulated lava pool. The only way to escape was by solving a puzzle that required two people to operate controls on opposite sides, perfectly in sync. Zarkul wasn't used to working with others, especially not humans. But Mark looked at him with steady eyes and said, "We do this together, or we both fall." It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. For the first time, Zarkul listened. Mark gave calm instructions, guiding him step by step. Zarkul, unused to taking direction, followed without resistance. As the platform tilted dangerously, they moved together, hit the final switches, and the structure rose out of the lava just in time. The crowd stood in silence, then applause echoed through the chamber, not for victory, but for the lesson. A human had taught a warrior that true strength wasn't in crushing others. It was in understanding, adapting, and leading. Later, as they stood outside the arena, Zarkul finally spoke to Mark, not with pride, but with respect. "You are not what I expected," he said. Mark smiled and replied, "That's the first thing every enemy of humanity learns." And with that, the two walked side by side, not as enemies, not yet as friends, but as beings who now understood each other in a way the galaxy would not forget. Word of the strange challenge between the human and the Threx warrior had spread across the galactic market faster than light. Everyone was talking about it, not because there had been a fight, but because there hadn't. There was no blood, no violence, no grand display of destruction. And yet, somehow, the human had won. Not with fists or weapons, but with something far more powerful: calm, control, and strategy. Mark had proven a lesson that no one saw coming, and that quiet victory had echoed deeper than any war cry ever could. Now, even without saying a word, his reputation walked ahead of him. As he stepped into the corridors of the station, aliens of all species turned to look. Some nodded with respect, others with curiosity, but one thing was certain: none of them saw a weak, soft creature anymore. They saw something unpredictable, something dangerous in a way they couldn't measure with their usual standards. And for the first time, they began to understand that humans didn't need to shout to be feared. They only needed to act once, and the memory would last forever. Mark never smiled at the attention, nor did he try to use it. He simply continued his quiet routine, checking on Lena, fixing broken systems around the station, and responding to requests from those who now strangely trusted him more than anyone else. But deep inside, he knew what was happening. A new kind of power was forming around him. Not political, not military, but something older and more effective. A power built entirely on reputation. The leaders of several alien factions started sending observers to quietly follow him. Some wanted to understand how a human could influence even the proud Threx. Others feared what would happen if this quiet man ever got angry. They whispered stories about Earth, about the wars humans had survived, the worlds they had adapted to, and the things they had done in the name of survival. And with each whisper, the myth of human resilience grew. Mark became the center of a storm he had never meant to start. But not everyone liked it. There were those who saw his growing respect as a threat. Among them was General Rax. The Galactic Council had never been this quiet before. Delegates from hundreds of worlds sat silently, their eyes fixed on the human named Mark, whose reputation had become something far greater than expected. Just weeks ago, he was seen as nothing more than a civilian from a relatively young and chaotic species, a background no one took seriously. But now, everything had changed. After surviving impossible trials, calming a war-ready tribe, and solving problems that should have broken him, Mark had become something different in their eyes. He had become a symbol, not of power through destruction, but of calm strength, control, and deep understanding. And in that silence, each leader began to question everything they had believed about humans. For years, humans were judged based on their unpredictable history, wars, conflicts, and emotional decisions. But Mark had shown them something they had ignored: humanity's ability to learn, to adapt, and to forgive. He had used no force, yet defeated warriors. He had spoken gently, yet his words had reshaped the minds of alien leaders. And now, the galaxy stood at a turning point, unsure whether to fear this new version of humanity or embrace it as a guide in a dangerous universe. As Mark stood before the council to give his final report, he didn't speak like a victor. There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance in his posture. Instead, he looked tired, mentally more than physically, as if carrying the weight of all the misunderstandings placed on his kind. He spoke simply, honestly, and with a purpose that none could ignore. He said that the galaxy didn't need another empire or conqueror. What it needed was balance. Every species had something unique to offer: strength, speed, logic, memory. But humans brought something unexpected: the ability to understand pain and still choose peace. He explained how his people had made terrible mistakes in the past and how they had paid dearly for them. But it was through those mistakes that they learned what truly mattered: compassion, patience, and the willingness to listen before acting. Many in the chamber shifted uncomfortably. These were not the values they usually discussed in matters of power. But deep down, they knew he was right. They had built their alliances and defenses on fear, on the idea that peace only lasted as long as their enemies remained weaker. Mark was offering a different way, a slower, more difficult path, but one that could last longer and save more lives. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. One of the Threx warriors who had earlier challenged Mark stood up. He was not angry now. In fact, his eyes showed something close to respect. He raised his hand in a traditional Threx salute and said, "I believed you were soft. I thought your kind only survived through luck. I was wrong." One by one, others followed. A Velari engineer nodded. A diplomat from the cold planet Sithar gave a rare smile. Even a group of silent observers from the secretive Corinne caste gave a single, synchronized bow, a gesture they used only for those they considered equals. In that moment, Mark felt something shift, not just in the chamber, but across the galaxy. The fear surrounding humans was changing into something new, not blind admiration, but cautious respect built on actions, not assumptions. The galaxy wasn't ready to see humans as perfect, but it was starting to see them as necessary. And that shift meant everything. After the council ended, Mark walked back to his quarters, not knowing what the future would bring. Lena met him at the door, her eyes filled with pride. She didn't ask about the speeches or the reactions. She just said, "You changed something today, didn't you?" And Mark, still unsure of what exactly he had changed, simply nodded. That night, messages came in from across the systems. Not all were friendly. Some were full of questions. Others were cautious offers of alliance. A few were open invitations to speak at peace forums. But one message stood out, a short transmission from the edge of known space. It read, "We have seen what one of you can do. We wonder what a united Earth could become. Perhaps the future belongs to those who choose understanding." Mark stared at the message for a long time. Then, for the first time in days, he smiled.